Once you see it, you're never going to be able to unsee it. What's up, MetaNerds? This video is all about the Mandalorian Iron Heart, or in Mandoa, the Beskar Karta. So if you look at Mandalorian armor, you'll see that these later versions all have this shape in the middle. All different suits of Mandalorian armor used by Jango, Boba, Death Watch, and even the later Protectors all have it. And what's really interesting is that the Mandalorian from the new show does not have it at first. But once he gets that full set of Beskar armor, you see that there is a perfect Mandalorian Iron Heart. A really cool touch that will visually show the growth of the character, but what does it actually symbolize? Well, the lore says that they started to use it in the year 738 BBY. This year saw an event that the Republic called the Mandalorian Excision. In Mandoa it was called Dralhan, or the Annihilation. This is where the Republic invaded Mandalore and bombed the world into submission, turning it from a lush, beautiful world into these white sand deserts. As Darth Bane brought an end to the Sith Empire in 1000 BBY, the Republic thought that they could finally have peace if they could just destroy the war-loving Mandalorians. They knew that this would also require a cultural shift, and so the Republic installed a transitional government over Mandalorian space. And I happen to be a believer of a Mando conspiracy theory that states that the Republic created and supported the party that would come to be known as the New Mandalorians. These peace-loving Mandalorians wanted to partake in the Republic system, and rework the entire economy away from supporting the Mandalorian war machine. Mandalorian suits of armor were banned on Mandalore itself, which for them was akin to giving up their religion, as maintaining the armor was something that was kept up in the canons of honor. That all gets really complex and interesting, but we do cover it in complete detail in our documentary-length video. But basically, those who refused to give up these ancient traditions were exiled to the moon Concordia. Those Mandos did keep the armor tradition, and as they designed a new iteration, they incorporated this newly circulating symbol of the undying Mandalorian spirit. The Republic, Jedi, and Sith had all conspired to destroy the Mandoade. Now their world was reduced to a desert wasteland, but yet they still survived. But even more important for the culture is that the peaceful Mandalorians and those still keeping up the warlike traditions both utilized this symbol. No matter where you were on the peace-war continuum, all wanted to remember the time that their world was destroyed. This symbol is everywhere on Mandalore, even hundreds of years later under Duchess Satine. It's in abstract shapes that decorate the public areas, incorporated into clothing of both officials and civilians, influence the look of security, and it's even on their vehicles. But that doesn't mean that they both saw it the same way. To the new Mandos, it may be a symbol of how the war-loving traditions failed them, a reminder that for all their martial strength, they were rolled over by the Republic. But to the traditional Mandos, they see it as an event that they should never forget, an attack that they should never forgive, and that Mandalorians can only count on themselves, and prepare for the day that they can get revenge. That their heart was undefeated, made from one of the hardest materials in the galaxy, Beskar, Mandalorian iron. So now that you know the backstory of this ubiquitous symbol, I hope you think of the Dralhan, the Annihilation, every time you see this Iron Heart. We've all seen the sigil and heard the tales, but what exactly is a Mythosaur? What's up, MetaNerds? This video is all about the Mythosaur species, and how it tied into Mandalorian culture. They clearly left a big impact on the galaxy, not just with the intimidating sigil, but also the stories of Mandalorians and these beasts spread across the galaxy, thousands of years after the creatures went extinct.
Your ancestors rode the great Mythosaur.
What's funny about that is that they never used them as mounts. Those were the defeated Basilisk species, and their amazing war droids. The only thing the Mandalorians ever did with the Mythosaur was to kill them in order to prove themselves and intimidate others. The Tong species were the original Mandalorians, and they arrived on the world that they would call Mandalore about 7,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. The Mythosaurs dominated all other life on this planet, and so the Tong's arrival was like a new bully coming to the playground. Or I guess you could think of the Mandalorians as being meteors to these dinosaurs. The fact that Mandalore was covered in these terrifying beasts was taken as a sign from their war god that this planet was reserved for warriors. So they enthusiastically went about making the Mythosaur extinct. In the words of Paz Vizla, the ancestor of Pre-Vizla that would later lead Death Watch, when the progenitors arrived, Mandalore was inhabited by huge horned creatures, the savage Mythosaurs. The clans tested themselves against these great beasts, until all had fallen before their axes and swords. They would leave these carcasses to rot where they lay, and eventually the bones of these enormous creatures acted like monuments to the Mando's power. Anyone that visited Mandalore was constantly reminded not to mess with these kinds of people, and that effect would remain for thousands of years, with some Mythosaur bones being used in various outposts across the galaxy. These ancient Mandalorians crafted ceremonial weapons from these various bones, with the most well-known being the Mythosaur axe used by their leader. Mandalore I organized the Crusaders that would eventually carve out Mandalorian space. The sign of his rule was this mask, a mask that was carved out of the sternum of a Mythosaur. The Mandoa word equivalent to crown was Krybes, literally meaning Mythosaur skull. So even when the wearing of this bone mask fell out of common practice, the word still traces its roots back to this ancient tradition. The first clan known to take it as their sigil was the Keldabe clan, but it would be incorporated into the design of the Neo-Crusader armies, and the major Mandalorian shipwright Mandel Motors used it in their logo. Later, as the clans started to split off during times of weak rulers, often falling into mercenary bands, sporting this sigil became more and more popular. Perhaps it was comforting to have something that was exclusive to Mandalore, and at the same time proof of their once greatness. Doesn't hurt that it just looks badass either. Later during the Imperial era, there was this Mandalorian who built a sort of theme park, with a replica Mythosaur skeleton and all. But the accuracy of this size was debated, and that leads me into my critique of this, our only image of the Mythosaur. It isn't really accurate at all. These people fighting the creature are all humans, but at the time that these beasts were made extinct, all Mandalorians were just of the Tong species. Mandalorians of all sorts of species wouldn't come until many generations later, when only the sun-beached bones remained. This image also has it looking around 16 meters or 52 feet tall, putting it in between the height of an AT-ST and an AT-AT. But there are a lot of accounts that make it seem like it could be smaller, almost like a challenge for individual Mandoade. It would be odd to say that the mask was carved from the sternum, but really just mean a very small piece of that chest bone. But to be fair, I'm hoping that these were massive monsters too, and stuff like this skull and tusks in the Solo movie do point to them being giant. But then again, not to be a buzzkill, but the ratio of tusks to the rest of the head has always made me think they're kinda small. In order for it to be dragon-sized with these massive tusks, the eye sockets would also have to be ridiculously large. It might not be too crazy if the eyes didn't make up this whole cavity, but you also gotta note this large mouth and flat herbivore-looking teeth that stick out way farther than the horns. Not saying that you can't scale it up, but that ratio would have to stay, so it would make for a very odd-looking creature. Also, this mouth is not the same as the one in the anachronistic artwork, and since we know that this art gets the Mandos wrong, I'm gonna go with the ratio on the fossil record. And so with these tusks and rounded teeth, we may be looking at a herbivore. Not that fighting a Stegosaurus isn't badass, just that if it really was much smaller than we're made to believe, and it was just walking around nibbling on grass, the Mandalorians turning this into the most feared and respected sigils in the galaxy is both hilarious and really awesome marketing. But what do you think of all this? How large do you think the Mythosaur was? Do you think it was a herbivore? And what do you think of its legacy in general? Also let me know if you hope to see it on screen in some future Star Wars material. I know I am. What's up, MetaNerds? This video is going to show how the Mandalorian is making characters that are connected to the Clone Wars and even the Old Republic. Though he was not named in the episode, the credits and later sources have confirmed that that awesome heavy infantry Mando is named Paz Vizla. For those Old Republic and Clone Wars fans out there, the name Vizla means a lot, with several members of this clan having taken the title of Mandalore throughout history. And knowing this history gives some really cool layers to Paz Vizla's character, his statements, and his choices. And of course be warned, there will be spoilers for the Clone Wars TV show, Old Republic video game, and the Mandalorian show. So let's start with his ancient ancestor, Shae Vizla. She had worked alongside Darth Malgus to conquer many of the Old Republic's most prosperous worlds, like Alderaan. But they even sacked the capital, taking Coruscant in a daring invasion. This attack had Vizla invade the Jedi Temple, where she killed many Jedi in the building that served as the home of the Order. That was all around 3,653 years before the Battle of Yavin, and about 2 decades later she would take over the mantle when Mandalore the Vindicated was killed. Mandalore is the title for the sole ruler of all the Mandoade, and Shae Vizla was now known as Mandalore the Avenger. Her second in command was a man named Komogala, and so you can see that Mando greatness sticks around in your clan for millennia. In canon, the first we hear the name Vizla is with Tare Vizla, so this lineage has a Jedi killer and a Jedi Mando. In the ancient legends, the helmet of the Mandalore was what symbolized their legitimate rule. But after Tare Vizla, the Darksaber was used to unify all of the numerous clans.
Legend tells that it was created over 1,000 years ago by Tar Vizla, the first Mandalorian ever inducted into the Jedi Order. They used the saber to unify the people and strike down those who would oppose them. One time, they ruled all of Mandalore wielding this blade.
By the time of the Clone Wars, the planet Mandalore was ruled by the pacifist government of Duchess Satine, who tried to eliminate all of these old warring traditions. But their moon Concordia had a governor by the name of Pre Vizla, and he was the leader of a paramilitary force known as Death Watch.
For generations, my ancestors fought proudly as warriors against the Jedi. Now, that woman tarnishes the very name Mandalorian.
And by working alongside Darth Maul and the Shadow Collective, they were able to expose the pacifist's weakness, and convince the average Mandalorian citizen that they needed a new, strong Mandalore.
New Prime Minister Paz Vizla, leader of Death Watch, exiled governor of Concordia, true son of Mandalore.
Maul would take advantage of an honor battle tradition, and when he killed Vizla, he became the new Mandalore. This caused just the latest in a long line of Mandalorian civil wars. That reign wouldn't last long though, as the siege of Mandalore would put it under Republic control. And shortly after that, the Republic would become an empire, and Bo-Katan would be chosen as regent. She quickly proved to be too proud to be a puppet, and so Palpatine had her replaced with Imperial Viceroy Gar Saxon. Now this detail is a little confusing, but a Mandalorian house is a political faction, comprised of different clans that all share the same views and goals. House Vizla had in it, of course, Clan Vizla, but also Clan Wren and Clan Saxon. Sabine Wren would help develop the arc pulse generator when she worked for an Imperial weapons research facility. Beskar was seen by the ancient Mandalorians as proof that the war god had picked the planet Mandalore for them, a sort of covenant to show that he approved of their warrior ways. It was only found on this world, and was an incredibly strong yet malleable material that was worked into the armor that came to symbolize a Mandalorian. And thus this metal and wearing the armor is inextricably tied to the ancient religion and culture. But the ultimate traitor to the Mandalorians, Tiber Saxon, explains how this weapon deals such a symbolic and deadly blow to his own people.
As you see, the arc generator's energy pulse is drawn to the Beskar alloy in the Mandalorian's armor, superheating it and instantly vaporizing the target.
When Bo-Katan takes up the Darksaber to become the new sole leader, to throw off the Imperial rule, she is sworn allegiance by many clans, including Clan Vizla.
Clan Vizla is with you.
Clan Rook is with you.
Clan Elder is with you.
Clan Kreese is with you.
When exactly the Great Mandalorian Purge occurs is still not clear. It may refer to this time under Saxon, but I think it's most likely how the Empire responded to this Mandalorian unity and their resurgence. Though not yet portrayed, the Empire must have devastated the Mandalorians, spreading them off of Mandalore itself, and making the clans even more fractured than they ever were before. And that is why Paz Vizla feels that the Mandalorian has betrayed the tribe by working with the client, clearly a member of the Imperial Remnant.
These were cast in an Imperial smelter. These are the spoils of the Great Purge. The reason that we live hidden like sand rats.
As a member of a clan that had continuously fought for Mandalorian independence, I can't stand to see a Mandalorian help a man who holds on to ideas of bringing the universe under strict centralized Imperial rule.
Our world was shattered by the Empire with whom this coward shares tables.
And that's what makes the tribe showing up to save the day so meaningful, especially with Paz Vizla, who knows that the greatest threat to the Mandalorians has always been their own tendency to civil war. Their lack of unity hurt them during the time of the Old Republic, leaving them open to manipulation by the Sith Empire. During the Clone Wars, his own clan member Paz Vizla set it up so that Maul would be in power, which drew the Republic to invade. And under the Empire, a traitorous Saxon allowed outsiders to kill Mandalorians that he disagreed with. So though he was upset with the Mandalorian, he still had to show up to help. If the tribe wanted to show the galaxy Mandalorian solidarity, this is the way. And so that's it for this character's really cool connection to other Mandalorian history. And the only other interesting fact I want to point out is about his first name. In Spanish, Paz means peace. A cool tie to how this new Vizla we meet is at peace with the other Mandos, not trying to wage a civil war, and perhaps could help bring peace to his people in these post-Imperial days. Though a Mandalorian could easily kill you with their bare hands, their impressive weaponry certainly helped. What's up, MetaNerds? This video will cover all of the weapons used by the Mandalorians over the years. From conquering the deadly beasts that roamed their homeworld, namely the Mythosaur, and later waging wars against the Jedi and Sith alike, this all cultivated a warrior's mentality amongst their people, and they've been ruled by the best of their warriors for millennia. Despite their relatively small numbers by the Imperial era, they've always had a massive impact on galactic history, all with the help of their incredible arms, armor, and tech. So we'll cover all of it in both Legends and canon, multiple millennia of violent history, but let's start with one of the most important weapons from canon. Thousands of years before the Battle of Yavin, Paz Vizla became the first Mandalorian to join the Jedi Order, and created the Darksaber. a unique lightsaber with a more sword-like design and black marbled blade. He used this blade to be the first to unite the many warring Mandalorian tribes. Since then, it has been a symbol of leadership, being wielded by whoever currently rules the Mandalorians, Force-sensitive or not. We've seen it in the hands of Paz Vizla, Darth Maul, Sabine Wren, Bo-Katan Kryze, and currently Moff Gideon, who likely acquired it after he participated in the Siege of Mandalore. Sometime after Vizla's passing, Mandalore the Great led the United Mandalorians to wage war against the Jedi.
The songs of eons past tell of battles between Mandalore the Great and an order of sorcerers called Jedi.
While the war ended with the desolation of Mandalore, confining its inhabitants to sealed dome cities, they did mount a successful attack on the Jedi Temple, where they retrieved the Darksaber.
This lightsaber was stolen from your Jedi Temple by my ancestors during the fall of the Old Republic.
This war would come to shape much of the future of the Mandalorians in canon. In order to fight their greatest opponent yet, they had to develop a combat style that utilized a unique and varied arsenal with ranged weapons and hand-to-hand combat techniques. Beskar armor was also first developed during this period, and it was of great use against the Jedi. The ore could be turned into Beskar steel, and was found only on Mandalore in its moon Concordia, and it was resistant to lightsabers. This armor was worn over a body glove or jumpsuit, and almost always had a distinctive chest plate made of 4 separate Beskar plates, as well as a helmet which retained the distinct T-shaped visors of the most ancient of the Mandalorians. Mando armor was usually painted to represent the wearer's clan or allegiance, but Sabine Wren says that she painted hers herself after it was passed down to her through multiple generations. Among the weapons the Mandalorians developed to fight the Jedi was a concealed retractable vibroblade in the glove, which could sometimes be used to parry a Jedi attack or surprise an opponent who thought that they were giving up and that they were unarmed. Mandalorians of the Clone Wars era favored the Westar 34 and 35, which were Mandalorian-designed and produced blaster pistols, and famously could be dual-wielded, as we saw with Jango Fett and Paz Vizla respectively, while the unidentified Death Watch carbine seems to be a scaled-up version of the Westar 35. In Legends, we also saw the Westar M5 blaster rifle, a modular system that was used by bounty hunters and later the Empire, but most notably by the Legends ARC Trooper Alpha 17. Many may remember Darth Vader's iconic no disintegration line, which was directed at Boba Fett. And after all these years, we finally see what he meant by this. The Amban disruptor rifle would instantly turn biological matter into a pile of ash, a weapon that was actually banned by the Empire. Now, during the Clone Wars, this once proud warrior race had become pacifist under the leader of Satine Kryze, exiling any militant Mandalorians to the moon of Concordia, which is where Paz Vizla formed Death Watch, a secret order which intended to maintain the culture's ancient warrior code. Throughout the Clone Wars, they were seen as enemies, even terrorists by many, but they were also known to rescue populations from the CIS army. As we see, Death Watch would rescue the child that would grow up to be known as the Mandalorian, and we see them wielding a weapon that's similar but not identical to Boba Fett's EE-3 blaster rifle, and so it's likely a earlier or related model. Perhaps the most important part of the arsenal of the Mandalorians were their combat vambraces, which were their wrist guards that contained various weapons while still keeping their hands free. Some could fire these explosive darts, and there was even an attachment that would make a small personal shield. The most popular weapon used in these vambraces were the wrist-mounted flamethrowers, aka the ZX miniature flame projector, but it could also house whipcord launchers, and both were very difficult for Jedi to counter. Their lightsabers could of course not deflect fire, and they could be bound by a successful whipcord shot, allowing the Mando to either close in for a kill or bring them in hot, just in case they had a rather expensive bounty. However, many of these vambraces also had other attachments like concealed wrist blasters used by the Fets, or the mini saw blade launchers used by Paz Vizla. Perhaps the most deadly were the Whistling Birds, tiny homing micro-missiles which were used by the Mando to instantly take out 4 stormtroopers who had surrounded him. But they were very limited due to their use of Beskar.
Use them sparingly, for they are rare.
Which allowed them to punch through armor, but of course was increasingly harder to find, and so far it's the only known canon weapon that's made from this ore. As for tech, their magnetized boots and jetpacks also gave them amazing maneuverability, sometimes better than even a Jedi. While the exact models were of course refined over time, during the late Republic and Imperial eras they were known to use the Z6 jetpack, which included a back-mounted rocket launcher, and was effective against everything from infantry to even shooting down starships. And as we saw with Obi-Wan and Satine, they could actually circle back to track their target, though how exactly they locked on is unknown. And then there was the lighter JT-12 variant. Those trained in the school of the Rising Phoenix used jetpacks most effectively, as they did require a lot of practice and training to control. Now of course, Beskar is an incredibly strong metal and the pride of the Mandalorians, so why didn't they make more weapons out of it? Well, they did, but only in Legends. The Beskad was the traditional sword of the Mandalorians. It was under 2 feet long, but made of a hefty Beskar blade, and so it could be used to bash down an enemy's defenses, as there are very few materials that are actually stronger than Beskar. These are made much like real-life katanas, with the metalsmith folding the Beskar many times to create a very strong blade with a razor-sharp edge. And fittingly, they carry much of the significance of their real-world counterparts, being a weapon that was prized in their culture due to the skill needed to craft it, and seen as a source of pride for hundreds of years, even as more advanced technology came about. While much like the Darksaber in canon, in Legends it would be the battle axe that symbolized the leader of Mandalore. Mandalore the Ultimate would craft one from the wreckage of a Republic capital ship, an inexpugnable to be exact, with the head being made of metal sheets, but also lined with cortosis for a lightsaber blocking effect. This was a modernized version of the ancient Mythosaur axe, which originally was made from the calcified bones of the terrifying Mythosaurs that once ruled Mandalore, before the warriors made them extinct and turned them into the galaxy's most feared and recognized sigil. There was also the Crush Gaunt, or in Mandalorian, the Shukuruk, a heavy glove covered in Beskar plates that significantly increased the wearer's hand strength. It was said that someone wearing the Crush Gaunt would be able to crush metal, rock, or bone in their hand. Because of this, they were often used to easily snap an opponent's neck, or even could be used to catch and hold a lightsaber blade in the wearer's hand. Something that surely would have been a shock to any Jedi unlucky enough to go head-to-head with a Mandalorian wearing these gauntlets. But despite their amazing arsenal, they could not hold out against the sheer numbers of the Empire. Thus, they were beaten into submission after the Siege of Mandalore, in which most of their forces were wiped out. Moff Gideon knows that to the Mandalorians, this is known as the Night of 1,000 Tears.
Songs of the Siege of Mandalore, when gunships outfitted with similar ordnance laid waste to fields of Mandalorian recruits.
We know little of this night besides the fact that it led to the seizure of most of their Beskar and drove out most of the remaining Mandalorian warriors into hiding. Gar Saxon, a Mandalorian who joined the Imperials, was installed as the Imperial Viceroy of Mandalore.
Worse, they're traitors, Mandalorians who serve the Empire.
Saxon also led the Imperial Commandos, a highly elite group of Mandalorians who swore service to the Empire. They wore sleeker, all-white armor that blended the traditional Mando aesthetics with the traditional Stormtrooper armor design. But interestingly, it was still made from the reforged Beskar captured during the sieges, and they wielded traditional Westar blaster carbines. Since Mandalorian training was of course far better than anything the Empire could offer, they were among the most elite of the Empire's forces. Before them, during the Clone Wars, was the Mandalorian Protectors, also known as the Royal Guards that were meant to protect the ruler of Mandalore and try and maintain a balance in their warrior culture. They can be seen in the Clone Wars protecting Duchess Satine before Death Watch gained control. They were also brought in to train clones, much like in Legends, and sometimes even fought alongside them. Years later, in order to protect themselves from decimation, their leader Fen Rao reluctantly signed a treaty with the Empire, swearing loyalty. And here we can see that the Mandalorians weren't just excellent warriors, they were also good pilots, as when they first met, the Protectors were able to wipe out a squad of A-Wings and nearly killed the rebel leader Hera Syndulla. During the Clone Wars, their primary starfighter was the Kom'rk class, also known as the Gauntlet Fighter, and these are also prominently used by Death Watch, and these are manufactured by their native Mandel motors. Darth Maul would fly his own Kom'rk class fighter named the Night Brother for about 17 years, coming from his takeover of Mandalore near the end of the Clone Wars. During the reign of the Empire, the Protectors would use the similar Fang class fighter, as they were one of the few people to secure a contract from the Empire that allowed them to produce these starfighters openly, and they worked in some improvements over the Kom'rk. Not only would the whole wing engine assembly pivot to allow for vertical takeoff and landing, but it could also rotate during flight, and allowing the wing-mounted laser cannons to be fired with minimal reposition of the ship. So that's it for their armor, arms, tech, and even starfighters over the years. But you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind-the-scenes stuff. Capitalizing on the look of one of the most loved characters from the original trilogy, George Lucas wanted to tie the clone troopers to Jango and Boba Fett, and so that's what inspired the look of the Phase 1 clone trooper armor. There's tons of debate over whether or not the Fetts should be true Mandalorians. At once, Lucas definitely implied that, and later said that he didn't want them to be so. And in the Clone Wars episode, The Mandalorian Plot, it stated that he was never a member of the Mandalorian culture. But keep in mind, these are other Mandalorians deciding who is not a true Mandalorian, as there was this tension between becoming peace-loving people and staying warriors. The Mandalorian's Amban disruptor rifle is based on the weapon Boba Fett was carrying during his first appearance. Not in Empire, or even in the New Hope re-release, but in the Star Wars Christmas special. And so you could say this is also the first appearance of Mandalorian armor. I'd imagine an old Mandalorian saying went something like, "Hokey religions, ancient weapons, and blasters are no match for a good disruptor rifle on your back." What's up, MetaNerds? This video is all about the disruptor rifle. This type of weapon has been around for a long time, and in all kinds of forms like pistols, balls of energy that could clear an entire room, and different makes and models of rifles. As you can see with the effects on the Jawa here, they disintegrate the target in a flash, leaving behind nothing but the clothing. But how exactly does that happen? Well, it is not just a really powerful blaster. The way a disruptor works is by splitting molecular bonds, separating you atom by atom. From the outside, it looks like the victim dies in an instant, but the way the weapon works was described on the Senate floor as being one of the most excruciating deaths in the galaxy. Think about how a burn feels across a relatively large part of your skin, but then imagine this happening at every location on your body, and picked up by every neuron in your entire nervous system. An overload of input that to you would make time appear slower, sort of like how a psychedelic experience or even something like a stressful event, quote-unquote, slows down time. This sensation of time slowing down is theorized to be due to such a dramatic change in sensory perception, which is not any fate that a Jawa deserves, no matter how grand the theft. And it's this nature of these weapons that got them banned in the Imperial Senate, not just in the soft Republic times. Even the Imperial Senate, which was mostly a symbolic holdover, having no real power over Palpatine, they were able to get them taken out of the military's hands after the imps used them on Lassan. During the siege of Lassan, Agent Callus of the Imperial Security Bureau utilized many T7 ion disruptors on the Lasat species.
I was there when Lassan fell. I know why you fear those disruptors. I gave the order to use them.
They stood no chance, and when investigators look into how these weapons worked, the Senate was horrified to learn that what they thought was the entire species had come to this excruciating end. They banned all forms of disruptor technology, though admittedly this wasn't a widespread weapon. It was really only sought out by two factions: criminal empires and the Mandalorians. The Zon Consortium found ways to manufacture them, and the Mandos actively sought out these rare and deadly weapons. It has long been known that Boba Fett utilized disruptor rifles, and this is what may have gave rise to Vader's stern instructions.
No disintegration.
But very interesting is that under Luke's Jedi Academy, he did allow his Jedi to use disruptor rifles in order to carry out their missions. And we can imagine that it was both in the Empire's interest to ban these powerful weapons, but also that once they fell, the supply and demand would have shot up. The Mandalorians was probably acquired while the Empire was still in power, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was a custom-made creation, especially with the working in of that shock feature. No disruptor rifles post-ban were made by large companies like Blastech or Sanblast. Instead, they were engineered and manufactured by individual clandestine operations across the galaxy. Many others were simply reworked and refurbished from those that were not confiscated or destroyed. So it is very likely that the Mandalorian has a one-off, or perhaps one of the Mandalorian tribes found a way to produce them. That shock tip is not seen on any other disruptors, but is a feature in things like bow rifles. When you consider the fact that the T7 ion disruptor could be used like a traditional ion weapon when disabling vehicles, it isn't too much of a stretch to think that the disruptor's ionic energy could be channeled through these veins, acting as an incredibly powerful stun weapon. Something that might allow you to bring in those bounties alive. So that's it for this weapon's history, and the only behind the scenes fact is that it was based on Boba's weapon in the Christmas special, but also during the Old Republic era, the Mandalorians had the deadliest disruptor pistol in existence. It was in such demand that it cost as much as a used starfighter. And I do want to point out that some lore states that they had been long banned by the Republic as well, for thousands of years in fact. But it seems like in canon it was the Imperial Siege of Lassan that finally got them banned totally. Perhaps we can merge these set of facts by thinking that it was always banned for civilians, but now it was deemed so evil that it was taken out of the hands of the Imperial military. Something like how certain weapons here on Earth are supposed to be banned even for military use. Let me know what you think of all this, and do you hope to see even more disruptor technology? Do you think they're just too overpowered, or fine if they're just used rarely, and when the lore makes sense? Definitely let me know down in the comments. What's up, MetaNerds? This video will pull from every resource available to understand one of the most unique crafts in all of Star Wars. The Basilisk war droid was originally conceived not by the Mandalorians, but by the Basiliscan species of the core world planet of Basilisk. These reptilians designed the droid as a powerful war machine thousands of years before the Galactic Empire, intending it as a semi-sentient weapon of war. In the year 4017 BBY, during the early Mandalorian Crusades under Mandalore the Indomitable, the Mandalorians invaded and conquered Basilisk. Rather than allow their technology to be taken, the Basiliskans poisoned their own world, but the Mandalorian Crusaders did manage to seize large numbers of Basilisk war droids for their own use. Thus, what begins as a Basilisk invention was repurposed by the Mandalorians as a fearsome mount and weapons platform. They renamed it the Bes Ulik, meaning Iron Beast in Mandoa, and quickly integrated these machines into their warrior culture. Despite a traditional disdain towards droids, Mandalorian Crusaders came to revere the Basilisk war droids as loyal companions and invaluable instruments of conquests, something like a mix of a horse and a dog. Only the most elite warriors were given the honor of riding a Basilisk into battle, effectively making them like Mandalorian knights, and these were weapons of terror, cavalry mounts meant to carry Mandalorian warriors into the fiercest battles, often literally dropping from the sky to shock and overwhelm their enemies. Other species that came across them would describe them as looking like a mechanical cross between a Zalorian rock lion and a Karan beetle. It walked on 6 legs with 2 heavy clawed forelimbs and 4 smaller hind limbs, giving it a low, wide stance like a predatory animal. The Basilisk's size could vary by model, generally standing about 2.98 meters or about 9.8 feet at the shoulder, but some variants were as large as 5 meters or 16.4 feet. The chassis was heavily armored with Durasteel plating, often painted in drab military colors, commonly green or gray, though some did have red and gold hues. This armor gave the droid considerable weight and durability, something like a small tank, and riders sat in armored saddles atop the droid's back. All the early models were open air mounts, a true mechanical war steed. This rudimentary self-awareness was thanks to an onboard droid brain. Classified as semi-sentient, comparable to some of the smarter, trained animals, it meant that they could bond strongly with their Mandalorian riders, forming empathetic connections much like living mounts would. The practical purpose of designing a machine like this was so that it could develop an intelligent relationship with the rider, picking up on all sorts of subtle cues, programming through environment and action, not just pure digital programming on the software level. It effectively acted as an extension of the warrior's own body during combat. But like we've seen with droids throughout all of history, this meant that they developed a lot of emergent behaviors. When a rider was killed, these droids were known to howl as if in pain. Though they were never depicted as independent assassins or thinkers, they do seem to be utterly reliant on direction. Someone needs to give them orders. And at the sensor level, in how they took in a lot of inputs from their environment, comes via various sensor clusters at the front and rear, giving it 360-degree threat detection, just about unheard of in the animal kingdom. It had incredible physical power. The 2 front claws could be used not only for walking or for landing, but also as melee weapons capable of tearing through obstacles and even ripping apart other armored opponents. It might pounce or trample opponents, and their exteriors could be fitted with all sorts of melee weapons like axes and swords, kit for their Mandalorian rider, really personalizing their iron beasts. And over time, extensive Mandalorian tinkering produced a wide range of Basilisk variants tailored for different roles, from 2-seat bombers that carried a pilot and gunner, to lighter stealth versions with reduced armament and extra engines. Some late generation designs departed drastically from this original animalistic look, featuring large wings and full cockpits. These really do get into the conventional starfighter territory. And all of these versions would play crucial roles in Mandalorian history. One reason they were considered, quote, the epitome of weapon technology was their fearsome array of built-in weaponry. Virtually every part of the droid's armored frame was packed with armament. Front and center at the Basilisk's nose was its primary weapon, a cluster of shockwave generator rods. When fired in unison, these rods emitted a concentrated plasma burst, essentially a short-range plasma cannon blast capable of blowing apart infantry and even punching through starship hulls. This horrific weapon let Basilisks engage small spacecraft, or even fortified bases, ripping holes through them with this raw energy. Complementing this were multiple laser cannons and other pulse wave cannons mounted on the droid's body. These provided rapid-fire blaster streams for cutting down troops or strafing enemy positions, functionally similar to the blaster cannons on a gunship. For heavier targets, the Basilisk carried missile armament, internal shatter missile launch tubes, and externally mounted concussion missile launchers, typically with a payload of 4 missiles ready to fire. Shatter missiles were anti-armor warheads, while concussion missiles gave the Basilisk a longer-range punch against vehicles or emplacements. They could even deploy mines in battle, carrying a pair of space mines that could be dropped in the path of pursuing starfighters, or directly onto a battlefield. And there were special scenarios where groups of Basilisk could carry especially destructive ordnance. Pairs of Basilisk war droids could tandem tow an atomic compression bomb, essentially a nuclear device, and fling it at enemy ships or cities. This tactic turned all these droids into ad hoc bombers. literally dragging weapons of mass destruction into position. And its weapon systems could be automated, linked with the droid's semi-sentient brain. And this meant that while the rider was focused on piloting or target selection, or even dismounted and engaging in one-on-one combat, the Basilisk itself could auto-fire its cannons at any hostiles in range, acting like a separate gunner. And because it was so dense and sturdy, you could smash it into things like you would never do with a starfighter. It can fly, but also just drop down on foes and cause impact damage. For its time, it was the most feared droid weaponry in the entire galaxy, in being used by the most feared warriors, at the peak of Mandalorian power. A key factor in the Mandalorians' conquests. Operating perfectly on the ground, in the air, and even in space, it was the true all-terrain vessel, as tucked against the droid's sides were the armored plating that doubled as retractable winglets. In flight mode, these sort of wings would deploy and reveal their high-output propulsion engines. What's really interesting is that early Basilisk models lacked true repulsor lifts. There's no anti-grav function to just levitate them off the ground. So it's really unlike just about everything else we ever see. It would just engage its engines and shoot off like a rocket, flying at speeds of up to 550 kilometers per hour, or about 340 miles per hour, which is faster than most speeder bikes. It can just run on its feet, or whenever it wants, just hit those rockets and take off. It was said to be especially slow to turn, especially these early models were incredibly heavy. The stability fins on the tail were essential for control. The droid could become very hard to pilot in midair, quickly becoming impossible to control, and just a big deadly asteroid falling back to the surface. But this unique combination of running and rocketry allowed a terrifying tactic of using high straight-line speed and diving attacks, plunge towards things or dive down like a falcon, or a living guided missile, itself inflicting damage, unlike some nimble fighter. It was the payload, starts to unload in its auto mode function, while the Mando pilot is using his jetpack to descend safely and bring about his own carnage. What truly set them apart, though, was their ability to function as spacefaring attack craft. Mandos often had them in their warships, held in drop bays with magnetic clamps, and they could be launched directly into space alongside conventional starfighter squadrons. Outfitted with sealed systems, they had no issue operating in the vacuum of space. Even their riders were always wearing those pressurized armor suits with life support. Basilisks would literally drop out of launch bays and free fall toward enemy ships. They could engage fighters with their cannons, or even latch onto capital ships using their claws, ripping them apart like mechanized bears. And in one battle, we even see one grapple a Republic Kom'rk-class starfighter and tear off its cockpit canopy in mid-space, or swarming larger vessels and using their shockwave rods and bombs to breach holes or defenses. True iron beasts. And then there was the infamous signature tactic of this era, atmospheric entry assaults, where Basilisk riders would dive from orbit straight down to a planet's surface, using the droid's heat shields and mass to survive re-entry. They were using them like meteor-like drop pods, only igniting engines at the last moment to adjust trajectory. This made targeting them with ground-based defenses extremely difficult due to their tremendous speed of descent. By the time a Basilisk was detected falling through the sky, it could be slamming into enemy lines, rider guns ablazing and shockwave rods flaring. Mando vet Canderous Ordo vividly described the experience of falling on a Basilisk from space.
The doors opened in front of me, and the air was sucked out of the drop bay, scattering crystals of frozen vapor across my path. I can't describe what it feels like to look directly down at a world, falling continuously as you circle it, with barely 15 centimeters of armor plate protecting you. When the magnetic locks disengaged on my droid, I plunged out of the drop bay towards the battle that waited below. The euphoria I felt as I streaked into the atmosphere, dodging self-guided projectiles and beam weapons, was unmatched. An 80-kilometer plunge through the atmosphere, dodging and weaving, the outside of my armor glowing like the sun with the heat of re-entry. And with barely 30 meters to spare, I twisted and skimmed the surface, firing at the giant beam generators that were in my path. The explosion from that sent shock waves that leveled the entire complex around it. It was the moment of my life.
In atmosphere, once they leveled off from that dive, they could hover or strafe like attack craft. And they were used for high-speed bombing runs, much like Y-wing bombers, but also for slower close air support like an LAAT, hovering above battlefields to rain laser fire or deploy troops. And so now that you understand what it is and how it was used, why it was so unique, Let's look at its history proper. They became synonymous with the rise and expansions of the Mandalorian Crusaders. After their capture in 4017 BBY, Mandalore the Indomitable's forces wasted no time in deploying these newly acquired Iron Beasts. During the Crusaders' campaigns, basilisks were used to strike fear and chaos into countless enemy worlds. These Mandalorian knights conquered the planet of Kuar, and even assaulted the mighty shipyards of Forost in one of the earliest campaigns. In the Great Sith War from about 3996 BBY, the Mandalorians allied with the Sith's Exarchun in Ulrich Keldroma, jetting down in basilisks during a surprise assault on the Galactic Republic's capital. They clashed with the planet's beast riders, who rode actual organic flying beasts, this conflict of flesh versus machine, in which the basilisks proved equally deadly in the skies. One of the most storied duels involved Mandalore the Indomitable fighting Ulrich Keldroma on Kuar. Mandalore even mounted his basilisk mid-duel to gain an advantage, showing off the droid's prowess, though Keldroma ultimately defeated him. After that loss, Mandalore pledged loyalty to Keldroma, and the Basilisk war droids became an instrument of the Sith war effort. They were used in the attacks on Foro's shipyards, where they helped the Mandos board orbital facilities and seize Republic warships, snowballing all these assets into the Sith-led assault on Ossus, as well as many other worlds. Mandalore the Indomitable met his end piloting a Basilisk. During the retreat from Onderon, his Basilisk was shot by a Republic ship, causing him to crash on the moon Dexon. Though he died, the Zon Consortium said he was torn apart by Dexon's beasts, the legacy of Basilisk terror continued under his successor, Mandalore the Ultimate. The Mandalorian Wars from 3976 to 3960 BBY saw these war droids deployed on a massive scale against the Republic. The Mandalorians, now organized as Neo-Crusaders, used basilisks as a core component of their shock forces. In the Battle of Cathar, they were used in an orbital bombardment with warriors raining down on the Cathar people, wiping out 90% of the population. At Vanko, they took part in orbital dogfights, and that's where we saw one grappling an enemy fighter. They were instrumental in the Siege of Taurus, patrolling the skies of occupied Taurus and keeping the population in fear. On Daxon and Onderon once again, they were fielded in several battles, imposing themselves over the thick jungles, though many of them would be overrun by the Rakul Plague on Jebel. Duro would see something that was described as, quote, raining down on orbiting cities like meteors. And one of Jango's ancestors, Cassus Fett, was a Mandalorian commander who fought in numerous battles like at Jagas Cluster, where he and his Basilisk riders would swoop in and turn the tide of battle. But the effective end of the Basilisk's golden age came about at the Battle of Malachor V in 3960 BBY, the climactic finale of the Mandalorian Wars. Mandalore the Ultimate was slain by the Jedi Revan, and the Republic's activation of the Mass Shadow Generator superweapon devastated the Mandalorian fleet and armies. In the aftermath of Malachor, Revan demanded the Mandalorians surrender and destroy their Basilisk war droids as part of these peace terms, giving up their iron beasts, their noble steeds, whom each rider did have a personal connection with. But reluctantly, many Mandalorian clans complied, scrapping or deactivating their beloved war droids, though of course not all obeyed. Certain clans, like Clan Ordo and Clan Gendry, secretly kept a number of basilisks hidden. These surviving droids continued to be used on a very limited basis. We see one in 3954 BBY, being brought to the remote world of Rakiad during a quest to find Mandalore's mask. A skirmish broke out between the two factions. Clan Ordo had 6 of them, versus Clan Gendry's 4, and Ordo's superior numbers forced them to retreat. This was Mando vs. Mando, Basilisk vs. Basilisk combat, perhaps the first time this ever happened. And shortly after this, Canderous Ordo unified the Mandalorians and took on the title Mandalore the Preserver. He gathered his people at an old Mandalorian base at Daxon. They maintained a modified Basilisk war droid starfighter, a variant with a fully enclosed cockpit and seating for 3, used as a shuttle between Daxon and Onderon. This variant was used by the Jedi Exile, Mitra Surik, to stealthily descend to Onderon's capital Isis during a civil war. Though many of its weapons were offline in that instance, its durable armor and deflector shields let it survive the descent under enemy fire, and its mere silhouette terrorized the Onderonians, who were traumatized by the sight of basilisks in their skies during those recent wars. As the eras progressed, they became increasingly rare relics. By the time of the Galactic Empire and the Rebellion, basically no one had ever seen one, though a few did resurface. Notimo, a Mandalorian mercenary lord, somehow acquired a Basilisk war droid and used it around 2 BBY, unleashing it against the rogue Jedi Galen Merrick, or Starkiller, during the skirmish on Cloud City. The droid's claws and weaponry was almost too much for this powerful Force wielder, but ultimately Starkiller was able to smash it into pieces, killing Notimo in the process. There are reports during the Galactic Civil War of engineers obtaining schematics to manufacture new Basilisk-like droids for private buyers. These recreations were said to mimic the ancient Basilisk's animalistic design, with the front and hind legs, but were scaled for a smaller rider and presumably made with then modern materials. By the era of the New Republic, authentic Basilisk war droids were essentially museum pieces. Most originals had been destroyed by conflict, or when their owners were forced to do so, and then just time got the best of them. All that were found and somehow still functional were deactivated and kept in collections behind transparent steel displays. The Mandalorians themselves had long since moved on to newer technologies, but the Basilisk would forever stay as a great symbol in the soul of a Mando. It would influence the very concept of heavily armored, all-purpose war mounts like seen in Mandalorian shipwrights of this time. The Mandalorian corporation, Mandel Motors, explicitly paid homage to the Basilisk in some of its starship designs. Around the time of the Battle of Yavin and 0 BBY, they developed the Star Viper class attack platform, which had robust armor, wing configurations, and was meant to have design elements reminiscent of Basilisks. More directly, they created the Bes Ulik class starfighter, which is using the same name, Iron Beast. This fighter was prototyped decades after the Galactic Civil War, and upon discovering a new source of Mandalorian iron, Beskar, the company's CEO, Jir Yamagit, decided to clad the ship in Beskar and christen it Bes Ulik in honor of the ancient droids. And the result was a cutting-edge starfighter with unparalleled durability, living up to the legendary Basilisks in spirit. Culturally, Mandalorians continued to reference these beasts in song and stories. The image of armored warriors dropping from the sky on mechanical beasts remained a symbol of Mandalore's might, even into the time of the New Republic and beyond. That's it for the breakdown. If you want to learn more, a lot of these resources come from the New Essential Guide to Droids and the Essential Guide to Warfare. Please hit that like button, it's the best way to help me out. But most important of all, remember, all droid discrimination ends when they start helping people win their wars. And the Force will be with you. Always.
Facing the Mandalorian clan chieftains attempting to defend the space above their planet.
What's up, MetaNerds? In this video we'll break down the Keldabe class battleship, the Mandalorians' main capital ship during the Imperial era in Legends. That might sound strange seeing the complete destruction and occupation of Mandalorian canon, but Legends was more complicated. We often compare things to the massive size of the Republic, Empire, and CIS, but even if you just controlled a dozen star systems, that's still an enormous amount of people and resources you have to protect. And while there was decades of civil war in Legends as well, from 60 BBY up through the Clone Wars, there was a powerful independent military mostly built by Mandel Hypernautics Corporation and Mandel Motors. The police would use things like the Pursuer, space was patrolled with the Kom'rk, scyk fighters, while also having capital ships for fighting off local warlords, which took the form of the Crusader and Keldabe, packed full of Canderous assault tanks, and the Star Viper heavy starfighter. When the Empire did take over, most of the troops and physical presence was left on Mandalore itself. Like with Kuat Drive Yards, they put an Imperial on top, but decided to let the Mandalorian shipyards stay operational, keeping everyone employed and helping keep these notoriously rowdy people from rebelling. All the Empire had to do was make sure their leaders were replaced with puppets, using that Mando sense of honor and structure against them, not making it so obvious that the Emperor was their new Mandalore. One of the Empire's first major requests was the production of dungeon ships, a design that was 4,000 years old and perfect for striking fear into the Imperial citizenry, as one of these could just float over your town, a little portable hell that you could pull people into, torture them, and drop them back into the population, to spread the story about what awaits those who defy their new lord. But even when Mandel Motors focused on building these, there's still plenty of the old stock left in Mandalorian space, and everyone from the rebels to local pirates dreamed of getting their hands on a Keldabe. It was named after their old capital that was destroyed during their own civil war, decades before the Clone Wars, the war that forced them into the dome city of Sundari. The official size of this ship is a Mando secret, but it appears to be around 1,200 meters, which would make it right around a Venator, and 3/4 an ISD. Some believe it was capped at around 1,000 meters, since it is a Keldabe class cruiser, and anything more would be classified as a Star Destroyer. but there are a ton of other ships that don't neatly fit into these categories. With the cost of 200 million credits, it is more expensive than the ISD and 4 times the Venator, which sadly is more economics than a praise of this thing's capabilities. It's powerful, don't get me wrong, but the millennia of Kuat drive yard dominance allowed them to have the supply networks and expertise to produce a better product at a cheaper price. There of course were powerful Mando shipwrights since the Old Republic era, producing ships like the iconic Kandosi type dreadnought, but typical of most of their history, it seems they never unified into a larger corporation, and the names of those various Mandalorian manufacturers are lost to time. Its top atmospheric speed was likely around 900 km per hour, with a real space speed of around 40 megalights, putting it in the range of Imperial capital ships, with an average Class 2 hyperdrive rating. The Keldabe is specialized for ship-to-ship warfare, and could slug it out with ships bigger than itself like the ISD, because it had such a heavy focus on high damage output, with 25 heavy turbolasers, 15 ion cannons, and 2 batteries of variable munition launchers, with 5 tubes in each, launching up to 10 missiles per volley, while having 5 heavy tractor beam projectors, and something that is only found on this ship, the shield leech system. Shield bubbles are projected via shield generators usually located in multiple places on a ship, cycling through like a water pump, and so the idea was to have tech that could siphon off this flow and use it to charge up systems on the Keldabe. This tech was actually only on the later Imperial era versions, while the leech device itself was developed by a Rebel Alliance team, making for one of the strangest crossovers in ship history. Mandel Motors was willing to take the risk and iterate this Rebel tech, and it seems like it was a great idea in theory, but it must not have been that incredible, if no other ship before even tried to experiment with this, and no one thought of using it again after. My guess is that it was just too finicky and a difficult to maintain piece of tech, that also required you to get up close to your enemy. It probably just wasn't worth the risk for most captains. It's unclear where that device would be located, perhaps in these wing sections or towards the front in these vertical sections, as this design is unlike any other ship of the era. These at least contain the engine array, with 4 main engines and 4 subsidiary engines, glowing in this unique yellow color. The color of ionized particles was due to a different fuel source, with yellow seen in all Mandalorian blasters, and even what are essentially supersized blasters, since although they're called lasers, they actually all work the same, firing a bolt of plasma. The yellow glowing plasma was unique to these people, and likely from a fuel source in Mandalorian space. Something major like a Bespin that could supply them their own fuel without relying on outsiders. These are likely radiators for shedding off heat from the enormous reactors, which must have been in this section, and also for the thruster columns. The reactor would channel this ionized gas to both the weapon systems and the thrusters, and we can see the pipes leading this plasma here, to a very logical placement of guns all across the cruiser. The wing structure is used to get a better firing angle and more guns on a single target by lining this edge on both port and starboard sides, and they're on both the dorsal and ventral sides of the wing. This seems obvious, but there are a lot of ships that don't have a layout that is this effective. Most Imperial ships need to build a whole step pyramid in order to have all their guns shoot forward, and are lacking in protection from targets underneath them. In this arrangement, some can shoot forward, some off to the side, and even those on the edge can fire behind the Keldabe, while all being able to turn and focus fire forward, without blocking each other or having some structure in the way. Same idea behind the guns lining the main spine on the top and bottom, while having more guns towards the nose, along with a battery of missile launchers so that the target can be engaged throughout the entire battle. Everything firing forward as you approach, and then turning to engage multiple targets on any side as the enemy scrambled to react. On the belly of the main section, we see the hangar bay, and there is just that one exit, which sometimes can be a problem when an enemy focuses fire on this. But it would have been packed full of 36 starfighters, 2 shuttles, and 2 light freighters. The latter used more for a troop transport when attacking land-based targets or space stations, but also for using the unique Mandalorian tactic of boarding enemy ships in the middle of space during battle, by using their sealed suits and jetpacks. With such a focus on heavy ratings for the turbolasers, ion cannons, and tractor beams, combined with major troop transports with jetpack sporting Mandos, you can see the ideal battle would have the turbolasers overload the enemy shield, and either open up with the missiles if you wanted to destroy it, or use the ion cannons to stun, the tractor beam to capture, and the fighters to target crucial systems like weapon batteries, engines, comms, and shield generators, while the troops boarded and captured whatever intel or VIP they wanted. Especially when this was designed originally to take on pirates, mercenaries, and Mandalorian splinter groups. All threats that you might want to take in alive, hoping to gain intel on the true mastermind behind these attacks, going after the leader and killing them, not just blow away endless hordes of underlings. The bridge was located up top in a design similar to Kuat drive yards, but wasn't as exposed, and was longer rather than taller, with better concealed comm systems and shield generators. The fact that KDY ships put this all up top here so exposed could not have been an oversight that nobody thought of. It must just work better like this, even if it's at a greater risk of being destroyed. You just hope the rest of your defenses and fighters can destroy anything before it comes too close. And it's just that the Mandalorian designers must have believed that this trade-off was worth it, working fine enough while prioritizing defense. It was crewed by 6,000, with the ability to transport 1,000 passengers, and a cargo capacity of 20,000 tons, the weight of 25,000 dewbacks, consumables to last them 2 years. This lower crew number is evidence to my theory that the Imperial crew numbers are bloated to just get as many people tied to the Empire as possible, lowering the threat of rebellion as they had a stable job with a check written from Papa Palpy. Since they claim they had a crew of 37,360 on a fully operational Imperial Star Destroyer, I'd imagine the real number was closer to what we see here in this Mando design. Toward the end of the Imperial era, the Empire was scrambling to put down the growing Rebel Alliance, and Tiber Zahn, pirate leader of the Zahn Consortium, saw an opportunity to take these ships at the Mando shipyards. These were allowed to exist because they were technically on standby to stop any rebel threat, but the pirates were able to extort Mandel hypernautics, perhaps by exposing their shield leech connection to the Rebel Alliance. And Zahn wanted to end it there, but his own pirates disobeyed him and captured the Keldabe called the End of Days. Zahn would execute the defiant pirate captain, but kept the cruiser and made it his flagship. Later, he would capture the supreme strategist of Mandalore from his Venator-class Star Destroyer.
Their proud warrior tradition means this will be a fight to the death.
A situation that shows how Mandalorians were used as a first line of defense against pirates and rebels in this area of space, giving them old Clone Wars ships that would have otherwise been decommissioned, but also how weak the Mandalorians of this era had become. No longer proud and independent, they were using hand-me-down Imperial ships and being bullied by pirates, with the enemy using their own Mando designs, like his captured Keldabe flagship, and swarms of Star Vipers to destroy the Mandalorians trying to defend their homeworld, and using the captured Supreme Strategist, Zahn was able to grow his forces even more, increasing his number of captured Keldabe, and using them during the battle for the Eclipse. This capital ship would slug it out with their shipbuilding rival, Kuat Drive Yards, with Imperial Remnant forces, Rebel Alliance, and Zahn pirates all fighting for control of the masterpiece that was the Eclipse Super Star Destroyer. But ultimately, he was victorious, though he didn't want the ship itself, but its hidden treasure.
I've no need to keep the half-constructed Eclipse, and it presents a target even the rebels couldn't miss. With the treasures from Palpatine's vaults, I can now spread my organization across the galaxy.
It's unclear how long these things would have been used for in the galaxy, but I'm sure everyone wanted their hands on one. Until the Mandos restored their power, and likely would have seen these in the hands of non-Mandos as a sign of great disrespect to their proud martial history. Flying symbols of the time they had been at the whims of Palpatine and piracy. Mando motors and Mando hypernautics have been brought back into canon, and a ton of Mando ships, including the Star Viper, are also in the new canon, so it's possible we will see a proper Mandalorian fleet with capital ships and all in the near future. I'm not sure how that would play out, if they say the Mandalorians just stayed out of the First Order conflict, or maybe even were aligned with them, because how do you explain them not showing up to fight back? I only bring this up, not to ruin your day, but I just had the horrifying thought that they might make a huge Mandalorian fleet, something awesome, and just imagine the fandom rage if Snoke and his friends show up and destroy it all. Hell, let Phasma kill Mando and all. I'm sorry, I just couldn't contain it. Had to dump the trauma and rage of that thought on you guys. But seriously, do you want to see a Mandalorian military that operates as a legitimate, independent faction, that could hold its own in a landscape of Imperial Remnant forces, New Republic, and Chiss Ascendancy, with massive capital ships and powerful navies? Let me know in the comments. If you want to learn more about this, info comes from the Rebel Era Guide, Mask of the Pirate Queen, Dangerous Covenants, and Forces of Corruption, with all the different mods and art used, link in the description. What's up, MetaNerdz? This breakdown of the Kandosi type dreadnought will take us back to the Old Republic era, a time when the Mandalorian fleets were at their peak strength, seeing its complement, armament, and a ton more, as well as how its legacy would affect the galaxy for thousands of years. It was created by various Mandalorian manufacturers, but would not have included the famed Mandel motors, since that most famous manufacturer was not even a millennia old by the time of the Battle of Yavin. Sounds funny to consider them a young company, but for reference, Rendili Hyperworks and Kuat Drive Yards were making major warships for the Republic for at least 4,000 years. And its manufacturer isn't some Mandalorian secret, but even they lost all accounts of this due to their fracturing from the Mandalorian Wars on. From 3,976 BBY, up to what we see in the post-Imperial era with Bo-Katan and Din Djarin. These people would lose a lot of their history to infighting, which in a twisted way shows just how important other aspects were to their culture, since the history and traditions that do survive had to survive countless forces pulling them apart. And yet things like their armor, Great Dragon symbolism, and Mandoa language were cherished enough to remember and keep alive. Which really says something, because what we do know of the manufacturer is that though they forgot which of the Mando companies produced the Kandosi, they proudly remember that they stole this tech from the Fenalar species, a history that includes their extermination by the Mandalorian Crusaders around 6700 BBY. The Fenalar were a highly advanced people that produced great dreadnoughts and armor. This armor was made of frick, which was a lightsaber and blaster-resistant rare material, in a class shared only with Cortosis and Beskar. They weren't claiming to be the geniuses that designed it, but were proud that they conquered these people, seizing their warships and Jedi-stopping armor, before exterminating them and incorporating these designs the nerd species developed into their more powerful and thus divinely supported civilization. Their war god smiled, as fittingly, this line of Mando-produced dreadnoughts based off this conquered tech would be named the Kandosi, meaning indomitable or ruthless in the Mandawade language. It is unclear how much of this design was uniquely developed by the Mando engineers over the years, but the dreadnought that would introduce itself to the Old Republic and Sith factions was this model, which cost 200 million credits. And since inflation seems non-existent in the galaxy far, far away, you can compare that cost with later ships like the Imperial and Venator Star Destroyers, showing something similar to the Keldabe, the effects of economy at scale seen in Kuat drive yards being able to produce something cheaper and in most ways better. At a length of 1,360 meters, or about 0.85 miles, it was right in between a Venator and Imperial, and more than 4 times the Old Republic Hammerhead. The height is about 680 meters, or 0.42 miles, making it about 2 Zillo beasts taller than an ISD, while at a width of 397 meters, or a quarter mile, it was more than twice the Hammerhead, while being thinner than both Kuat craft. With its Class 2 hyperdrive rating, it was on par with most capital ships across all eras, with the faster Class 1 being an exception, and it did have a backup Class 9. In the Keldabe, we saw a rare shield leeching technology, and the Mandos sure do like to keep their shields interesting, with this dreadnought having double-layered deflector shields. As good as that sounds, there must be a reason we don't see this tech even in Mon Calamari designs, which are usually considered to have the best shielding devices out there. It reminds me more of the cheaper, improvised type of armor you might find, like when real-world troops add sandbags or cages to stop penetration from explosive devices. No other manufacturer would use this double shield method, they would just make the shield stronger, and there would be the issue of shield projectors feeding into each other, so to make this work there's likely 2 different systems. Don't get me wrong, I think it's genius and a simple, practical solution, since 2 different types of shield projectors meant that you could hope that outer layer could be replaced before the final layer was defeated. But just like how no manufacturer is sending out troop carriers with sandbags and body armor stacked on top, that's something the troops developed from their battlefield experience, I think the Mandalorians improvised this double shield from their non-stop campaigns throughout the galaxy, and saw that it did actually work. The whole plating comes from a rare source, the company Biblos Drive Yards, which of all things would be most known for the G-1A starfighter used by Zuckuss. This company was great for developing cloaking technology, but not at the capital ship scale. Its armament consisted of 5 heavy turbolaser batteries, 4 point defense medium ion cannons, and 2 triple laser point defense laser cannons, with a pair of super heavy concussion missile batteries and a total of 120 missiles on board, as well as 2 tractor beam batteries. When compared to the Clone Wars era on, the Kandosi is a bit light, but it really isn't too far behind, especially considering that they went all in on the missiles, having about twice that of the Venator, while the ISD had none. The Imperial craft focused on cannons and tractor beams, better for capturing sneaky rebel ships, but the ancient Mandawade were willing to completely destroy anything in their path, knowing that if they did wish to take an enemy alive, they could send out their complement of 128 Devab-type starfighters to neutralize the engines and guns of an enemy ship, and send over boarding crews via the 8 Shadlar-type trooper ships, while the number of Basilisk war droids was described simply as numerous. The Devab was your standard fighter, but the Shadlar was this horrifying spider that could dig on or crawl across your space station or capital ship, and like a mama spider full of eggs on her back, this thing could unleash a swarm of 800 troops. That means that each carried more than an entire clone battalion. That's a total of 6,400 jetpack sporting Mandalorians that could be moved from the Kandosi to any target in a single wave. And of course, they could shuttle back and forth during major offensives, since there was a total of 30,000 troops on board each Kandosi. So all of them could be transported with these 8 Shadlars, making 5 trips each, meaning you could be resupplying certain areas, or choosing 40 different targets to drop more than a battalion on, exiting via these hangars below on some models, while others have it on these long sections up top, open on each end. The difference can easily be explained as different variants over the years. Either form provides great cover and rapid deployment, as you can't hit them as they exit when facing dead on, and when on the ventral side they could peel out each way or continue straight back to circle around, or just drop down right on top of the target, using the massive double-shielded Kandosi to escort them all the way up, absorbing whatever defenses the enemy might have, and unleashing the fighters and transports to make that final short trip down to the surface of the planet, station, or ship. You can see why when all of this is considered, it's not underpowered at all, and we haven't even looked at how effective the super heavy concussion missile batteries are. We'll see that when we look at the history. The crew was 10,000 in number, so a total of 40k is about 4 times the Venator, but a lot closer to the ISD. And since these Mandos were used to more Spartan quarters, you could pack them in a lot closer, and you can see why the Mandalorians of this era, with proper militaries and huge numbers, were such an overwhelming force for most of the galaxy. While the cargo capacity of 45,000 tons meant every single Mando on board could have a whole can-do back to enjoy for the length of the campaign. The only obvious issue to point out is that some of these guns are blocked by its own structures, reducing some of the forward-facing fire from the cannons, but they were expecting to make this up with a barrage of missiles coming from the bow and this entire lower protruding superstructure. These cannons are canted and could fire forward and back, while you might expect these ones up top to be ion weaponry, with the point defense lasers and anti-starfighter roll scattered across various surfaces. As for their history, the Mandalorian Wars would bring the full might of their fleets against the Republic in 3964 BBY, starting with the Battle of Vanquo. But many point to the Crusader raids that started in 3976 and kept ramping up until they had to be opposed by the Jedi-led Republic military. Their fleets were anchored by the powerful Kandosis, along with the Krymud-type battleship, Jahave-Ir-type assault ship, dungeon ships, Q-carriers, and Taroch-type gunships. These were used to blitz Vanquo, easily overwhelming them with these powerful capital ships and an insane number of troops that could be rapidly transported. And then this tactic was seen on Tarsis, though this fight was more difficult, requiring a 3-pronged defensive that eventually did result in a valuable addition to the growing empire of Mandalore the Ultimate. His Neo-Crusaders were operating from an HQ established on the frozen world of Jebel, and they quickly set sights on Sirocco. This world had full member status in the Republic, and this battle would forever change the relationship between the Mandalorians and the rest of the galactic community. The Jedi and Republic forces would lead Battle Group Sirocco from the Inexpugnable class tactical command ship named Courageous, forming a blockade with Hammerheads, Forays, and Aurok starfighters. When the Mando force did pop out of hyperspace, confirming their intel, they saw that the Kandosis immediately opened with a full volley of missiles. All power was directed to the forward shields. They showed a previously unknown capability. As the missiles raced toward the Republic capital ship, they abruptly changed direction, and within seconds were striking the surface of Sirocco. Their plan was to cut off all the ground reinforcements, as the Republic was planning to cycle out forces in the blockade as the space battle raged on. They saw the mushroom clouds forming all across the planet. These were not conventional weapons, but nuclear warheads that had turned the Republic bases and major cities into massive glass craters. Only 8 ships would be able to make it off-world and evacuate the fallout. As the battle continued, the Republic fleet would be pursued into deep space, and the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders showed just how well they had perfected ship boarding. Going right for the head, the flagship of Admiral Karath was swarmed by Mando transports, and now close-quarters combat skills would determine the outcome of this first official battle between these two powerful factions. The Courageous was still trying to flee, as the Mandos were clearing decks, and the crew was making desperate attempts to get away via escape pods. Karath tried to make a last stand with Jedi allies and elite troops, but eventually they were surrounded in the brig. Luckily for them, their Jedi helped use the Force to create an opening, and these last defenders narrowly escaped with their lives. With this overwhelming victory motivating them, the Mandalorians would push all the way to the core and strike fear into all the elites on Coruscant, the ancient and original homeworld of the Mandalorian ancestors. But eventually, the might of this ship would have to be turned against their own HQ on Jebel, when Cassius Fett was faced with stopping the Rakul Plague, a disease engineered by an ancient Sith Lord Karnus Mur. It would kill over 60 million on Taurus and 1 million Mandalorians on Jebel before Fett gave the order to glass this world and contain the plague. With the bombardment of nukes and the resulting fallout, this threat to the Mandos was finally stopped. Over the next 3,000 years, the Mandalorians' grasp on the galaxy would slowly fade, due to responses by the Jedi, Republic, and betrayals from their Sith allies, but mostly from the fracturing within their own clans, something they would never fully recover from. And while the might of the Mando fleets was gone, the memory of the Kandosi would go on to influence the Dreadnought-class heavy cruiser, manufactured by their old enemy, Rendili, but also the Mandel Motors creation, the Crusader-class corvette. As for behind-the-scenes facts, according to the Knights of the Old Republic campaign guide, a notable flaw in their design was that their hyperspace navigation systems could be crippled by a strategically placed charge in the rear, which must have been tricky to pull off when the double shields were activated. There's a rich modding community out there that involves this craft, and even a fan-made Kandosi too. It's really interesting. If you want to check it out, links to all these sources are in the description, while most of this info comes from the Knights of the Old Republic comic series, Essential Guide to Warfare, and Dreadnoughts of Rendili. What's up, MetaNerds? The Kom'rk class fighter/transport was developed by Mandel Motors during a period when Mandalore was politically divided between the pacifist New Mandalorians and the traditionalist warrior clans. Although Mandel Motors remained an established corporate shipbuilder on Mandalore, they knew their people better than the government did, and so the Kom'rk was designed with the needs of militant groups in mind. It's likely some within the company were even sympathetic with Death Watch, and other clans who continued to operate militarily despite the government's stance. And the ship really does reflect a covert military context. It was meant to give Mandalorian fighters an extremely fast, flexible, and visibly Mandalorian platform, capable of long-range deployment, troop delivery, and rapid assault. So from its inception, it was built to be used by smaller clans, not for the official government fleet. Remember, it's designed before the outbreak of the Clone Wars, when militarization was even more startling. Even the Republic at this time, at least publicly, had no military. It was just the judiciary forces, and Satine Kryze had long been trying to get the Mandalorians to forget their warrior past. There do seem to be several models, but in its basic configuration, the Kom'rk class measured about 52.3 meters long, or 172 feet, making it more than 1.5 times longer than the Millennium Falcon, or about 7 times the TIE Fighter. But it is also 29.8 meters or 98 feet wide, which is also about 2 Wookiees wider than the Falcon. It could be operated by a single pilot, but often had a co-pilot/gunner, and space for around 24 passengers, usually heavily armed and armored Mandalorian warriors. The design featured a narrow main fuselage with 2 very large pivoting wings mounted laterally, and these wings rotated between horizontal flight mode and vertical landing mode, making it so it could land in tighter spots. Maybe you're trying to hide this LZ from the government, but when it's being used in atmosphere, you still have this really wide and long surface, which gave it good aerodynamic control in atmosphere. And it was extremely fast for its size, capable of fighter-like agility, rapid acceleration, and long-range mission profiles. At 1,000 kilometers per hour or 620 miles per hour, it was barely slower than the X-Wing, but the TIE is notably faster. Its armament was primarily the forward-mounted laser cannons. There were also 2 rear-facing laser cannons, but it could also pack heat-seeking missiles. Though the general role of the ship was multi-purpose, meant to protect the troops while you got them in and out of combat, but don't think of it as a heavy assault fighter. Even if there probably were several other hardpoints, maybe there's a ton of other weapons that this thing could wield, and it's just that we're only seeing those heat-seeking missiles. Just looking at all the things a Mando has on them, it's likely their ships were also heavily customizable. Probably every type of weapon could be packed onto this thing, and sadly we just don't see that. It did have deflector shields, and that rear troop ramp to easily offload those 28 troopers, almost always with their jetpacks, making this one of the most unique ways to insert squads quickly while still being maneuverable enough to engage in dogfights or close air support. The fact that it can keep up with TIEs and X-Wings while ripping through landing craft like LAATs shows just how good Mandel Motors was at designing a ship around its purpose. And its Class 1 hyperdrive and backup Class 10 put it in elite territory, faster in that blue void than the X-Wing, and TIE fighters of course have no hyperdrives. All for a reasonable cost of 190,000 credits, more than 3 times the disposable TIE, and about twice the base YT-1300 model, and slightly more than the X-Wing. But for that full fighter transport role, I really do think that's a great deal. The earliest major operations with the Kom'rk were with Death Watch under Paz Vizla during the Clone Wars. They used blue-painted ships with distinctive Mandalorian markings while conducting raids from their base on Concordia, and these ships were seen launching small strike teams, transporting leadership personnel, and moving between hidden staging areas. And by now, Mandel Motors had produced the smaller fighter's sister ship and the Akajor-class shuttle, which were based on a shared ship design and shared many of the same parts, making producing them easier and cheaper, and it also made it cheaper and easier to run all of these. Your clan could have a diverse fleet of specialized ships, and these shared parts made maintenance a lot easier. Bo-Katan Kryze and her Night Owls often relied heavily on the Kom'rk class craft, and their operations made the ship's rotating wing landing profile famous or infamous throughout the galaxy. One of these was used by Paz Vizla to rescue Maul and Savage, who would then go on to help take over multiple crime syndicates, including Black Sun and even the Hutts. And during the later phases of the Clone Wars, including the Siege of Mandalore, Kom'rks were used for urban insertions, along with movements across the domed cities of Mandalore and in close quarters engagements in this dense urban battlefront. After the rise of the Empire, surviving Kom'rks continued to be used by Mandalorian groups who resisted Imperial control, and clans and protector forces kept these ships in operation, and their combination of range, speed, and troop capacity made them useful for clan warfare and off-world missions. If you think about it, they really are the perfect ship for mercenaries and smugglers, as they also had great room for consumables, meaning you could stay away from your base for a long time. By the time of the New Republic era, the Kom'rk class had become rare but was still functional. Bo-Katan retained one as her main vessel, using it to travel between scattered Mandalorian survivors and to launch operations aimed at rebuilding Mandalorian strength. And it also served as a command and transport platform for coordinating with Din Djarin and some of the other clans. Years later, she would pilot one at Lafitte around 9 ABY, and then used it to fly from Kelvara to Mandalore with R5-D4 and Grogu aboard. But upon returning to Kelvala, she was met with TIE interceptors. Though she managed to destroy several of them, and even a TIE bomber with the heat-seeking missile, but she had to withdraw when reinforcements arrived. Later, she used this same ship to insert 2 Mandalorian strike teams onto Navarro during the Pirate Siege, and help destroy Gorian Shard's Corsair in coordination with Din Djarin and his N1 starfighter. By 35 ABY, Kom'rk class and other Gauntlet fighters were still in service across the galaxy, a huge number of them appearing in the enormous civilian fleet assembled by Lando Calrissian to support the Resistance in the battle over Exegol. So we see that this ship, which was designed and produced in secret, going against the will of the official Mandalorian government, ends up kind of proving the Mandalorian spirit correct here, that this was not the time for peace. Giving up their military power resulted in their near extinction at the hands of Palpatine. And it was only the combination of all of these different craft with their militarized purpose which could come together to finally defeat the Sith. That's it for the breakdown, short and sweet. If you appreciate that, please hit the like button. I could really use your help. But most important of all, remember, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for Mandalorians to do nothing. And the Force will be with you, always. Whether you're a young slave boy in a Naboo starfighter, an emotionally unstable fanboy of that slave, or an Imperial allied Mandalorian, spinning is always a good trick. The Fang fighter, also known as the Protectorate fighter, is a very unique starfighter designed and used exclusively by the Mandalorian Protectors. The Protectors were an ancient group of royal guards for the ruler of the Mandalorians, who was known by the title of Mandalore. With the weakened state of Mandalore after the events of the Clone Wars, many of these noble warriors took a knee and dedicated their service to the Empire. As Imperial allies, the Protectorate was allowed to use Mandel motors to openly produce these ships, whereas other Mandalorian craft like these that we have covered in other videos were produced partially in secret and sold to criminals and rebels on the side. Being legal, they could continue the production of this Clone Wars era veteran ship. Mandel Motors, in conjunction with the Celestin company Surosub, were able to create this starfighter at a final production cost of 185,000 credits, making it more expensive than an X-Wing and greater than 3 times the cost of the TIE fighter. But those credits got you one of the most aggressive and nimble ships in the galaxy. Its top atmospheric speed of 900 km per hour, or 559 miles per hour, is a little slower than average, but its ability to rotate its wings is incredibly useful. Most starfighters have laser cannons in a fixed location, meaning the pilot has to move their whole ship to line up shots. You could just have the laser cannons move independently of the wing, but even that wouldn't give you the inescapable circle of death that is created by getting these wings to spin around the cockpit. With the Fang fighter, you simply have to line up the enemy in front of you, then fire your 2 wing-mounted light laser cannons while spinning, and your target is trapped. They can't move up, down, left, or right. You, however, can just turn the Fang fighter to any direction, causing the wall of plasma to smash into them. Or if you want to just use this laser fire cone to hold them in position, you could fire your ventrally located hidden proton torpedo. The mobility of these wings was also a crucial aspect in making it so agile. By moving its wings from horizontal to vertical, it could pass right through the formations of enemy starfighters. This ability to keep the cockpit stationary at the center while spinning the wings around you is incredibly difficult for the pilot, something that many Rebel pilots complained about with the V-Wing. But in the right hands, it was incredibly useful on both offense and when trying to evade through difficult terrain or through space debris. Then consider the fact that its overall profile was very small. Its official stats say it's only 6 meters long, or about 20 feet, but I'd say it looks closer to the length of an X-Wing, which is 12.5 meters or 41 feet. An A-Wing is 9.6 meters long in both canon and Legends, so I don't see how the Fang fighter is smaller than that. In their defense, perhaps they were just measuring the body. But no matter what, it can essentially modify its profile by changing the wing positions, and the overall height of this ship is ridiculously small. That, I would agree, is about the same as an A-Wing. In this clip, you can see that even with its landing gear down, this starfighter is shorter than a Mandalorian, and just barely taller than a gonk droid. So it has a deadly cone of laser fire, a small and adjustable profile, and is also very maneuverable due to the fact that these two ion engine arrays are on those adjustable wings. Change the position of the wing, and you change the direction of the thrust by outputting more to one side versus the other, so that you can make remarkably quick turns in any direction. The Fang fighter also has a Class 2 hyperdrive, more than adequate for quickly jumping in and out of hyperspace for hit-and-run missions. Combine all of these abilities with the fact that each of the Mandalorian Protector Fang pilots were trained by the infamous Fen Rao, and you can see why it was so easy for them to destroy an entire unit of Rebel A-Wings. With all these features, it's no wonder that it was used from the time of the Clone Wars, then as Imperial allies, and some later would be used by the Rebel Alliance. That's it for its history, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind-the-scenes stuff. It was first introduced on January 26, 2016 on the same day in the comic Kanan 10 First Blood, and the Rebels TV show episode The Protector of Concord Dawn. Later details would be added via the Star Wars X-Wings miniature game and the Star Wars Commander video game. So that's it for the Fang fighter. With the success of the Dune Lizard fighter, Mandel Motors produced a heavy starfighter variant. If you watched our video on the other Imperial-era Mandalorian starfighters, you know how hard it was to work around the Empire's ban on selling military-grade vehicles. The Dune Lizard and the Scyk Interceptor had superb maneuverability and great offensive and defensive capabilities. So for their next installment, Mandel Motors realized that they needed to provide a heavy fighter option. With the production of the Komogala, the Mandalorians had a trifecta of amazing starships to offer the galaxy. Many Imperial senators were able to get provisions to allow their planetary governors to buy approved military vehicles for the purpose of planetary defense. Naboo and a few other planets were allowed to work the Komogala into their assortments of defensive starfighters. But these legitimate sales opened the door for corrupt Imperial advisors to fix the books and sell these starfighters to criminals. The Hutts bought up so many Mandel Motor creations that they all earned a respective Hutt prefix. What made it a heavy fighter is the fact that it had a pair of heavy laser cannons and both a concussion missile and proton torpedo launcher. The total payload was 12 of either missiles or torpedoes, and all of this was a great upgrade to its weaker fighter and interceptor siblings. The Komogala's 850 km per hour or 528 miles per hour top speed has it tied with a TIE bomber, and isn't too much slower than the other Mandalorian ships of this era. This incredible power was combined with a Class 2 hyperdrive in an astromech, making it a relatively quick way to cross the galaxy. Keep in mind that the explosive ordnance payload was greater than that of the Y-Wing, and tied with the dedicated bomber of the CIS, the Hyena class. Its heavy laser cannons packed a greater punch than almost every TIE fighter variant, and was something that is only matched in other heavy starfighters like the ARC-170. Shields helped it to survive in a dogfight, but it was this ability to quickly jump in and out of hyperspace and drop a massive amount of firepower on the target that really drew the attention of criminal fleets. Its Hutt Heavy Fighter nickname lets you know just how much of a staple this was in the Hutt Empire, but many freelance mercenaries thought that its 170,000 credit price tag was well worth the price. It appears large enough to contain a small cabin, and though there is no interior information of those areas, we can see that its cockpit is very well laid out. You get a nice central window that gives a great view of your surroundings. And if you could delay some gratification and wait after it came out, the Mark II sports this double wing look, which I think is quite the visual upgrade. It also comes with twice the venting, but whether this is air intake, heat radiators, or vents through which ions could be propelled out as reverse thrusters is still currently unknown. The problem was that it may have gotten too powerful. With the scyk and Dune Lizard, Mandel Motors and their corrupt Imperial advisor made sure to not make the ship too OP. If it became a real thorn in the Empire's side, some more patriotic Imperial may track down the source and execute the whole company board as traitors. The Komogala was loved by its criminal consumers, but its infamous reputation was spreading. Worse was the fact that at this time, the Rebel Alliance had begun to launch attacks on the Empire. Odds are some of these Mandalorian-made fighters ended up in the ragtag fleets of the Rebellion. The prospect of sitting in a courtroom and watching hollow footage of their ships blowing apart Imperial assets was enough to force Mandel Motors to hit the emergency stop button. This successful line of fighters came to an end, and as far as we know, the Empire was none the wiser. So that's it for its history, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. There's a bit of lore inconsistency here, with the Komogala being said to be based off the design of the Dune Lizard. The Dune Lizard is known to have been introduced in the years following the Clone Wars, yet the Komogala is said to have fought in the Mandalorian-Athulan War. That was fought in the year 200 BBY, way before the Clone Wars. Besides that, it was based on the Komogala of Tatooine, a terrifying reptile just like the Dune Lizard's namesake. And all three of these Mandalorian-made fighters were first introduced in the Jump to Lightspeed expansion to Star Wars Galaxies. And additional information on this ship comes from the complete Star Wars encyclopedia, and is talked about in many other reference guides. If you watched our video on the M3A scyk fighter, you know how hard it was to sell military-grade vehicles during the time of the Empire. Major manufacturers, even the king of shipmaking, Kuat Drive Yards, had to allow Imperial advisors to sit on their board. The Mandalorian shipwright Mandel Motors suffered a time of complete suspension before they just accepted the advisor and promptly paid them off. Interestingly though, while the M3A always remained a covert creation of Mandel Motors, the Dune Lizard was allowed to be openly sold. But I think we can assume that this too required a bit of credits and corruption. Nonetheless, it started production a few years after the end of the Clone Wars, and sold for 115,000 credits. A very reasonable price considering what it comes with, placing it around twice the cost of the cannon fodder TIE Fighter, and 35 grand less than the X-Wing. For that, you got a ship with a top speed of 950 km per hour, or 590 miles per hour, making it just a bit slower than the main starfighters used by the Republic and the Rebels. Its double medium laser cannons are pretty standard, and surprisingly considering its badass appearance, it doesn't have any proton torpedoes or concussion missiles stock. These weapon mounts could be swapped out for ion cannons or the missiles and torpedoes, having 6 on board, but you had to pick between one of these, you couldn't have your laser cannons and your explosives. That modular component is something they kept from the M3A, the vehicle that paved the way for an era of popular Mando ships, which also included the Komogala Heavy Fighter. Because many Dune Lizard buyers operated on the wrong side of the law, quick maneuverability, a Class 2 hyperdrive, and heavy shield generators were the most loved aspects of this ship. It gained an infamous reputation in some areas of the galaxy, but most were smart enough not to engage many Imperials. And when you think of cartels that knew how to hold on to power even during Palpatine's reign, you think of the Hutts. And fittingly, this ship earned the nickname the Medium Hutt Fighter, as they made up a large amount of Hutt fleets employed to protect their holdings in the Outer Rim. But to be fair, the Dune Lizard wasn't exclusively used by pirates and smugglers, as some mid-rim worlds also used these for planetary defense. One notable world was Naboo, whose RSF integrated them into their fleets along with the Z-95, Fire Sprays, and Komogala. Naboo usually purchased the Mark II Dune Lizard, which lost the passenger seat in favor of an astromech. This variant also sees a dramatic change in the hull, from everything to a change in the nose to an overall increase in the length. This is true of each of the so-called Mandalorian-made Hutt fighters, where they all have a similar overarching design, and then each have 2 variants and modular weaponry. I don't know about you, but I'm looking forward to seeing what Mandalorians were up to during the time of the New Republic and canon, so maybe we can see those ships in some future Star Wars materials. So that's it for the Dune Lizard, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. This ship was first introduced in the game Jump to Lightspeed, an expansion of Star Wars Galaxies, and the name Dune Lizard comes from a reptile creature on Tatooine. Other details come from the complete Star Wars encyclopedia. We all know that the Hutts run the largest criminal empire in the galaxy, But how did they defend it? Well, when you're a massive slug species with little T-Rex arms that can barely reach your mouth, you get other people to actually do the construction work. The Hutts didn't work the shipyards themselves, but would turn to various off-world manufacturers for their ships. For the M3A Scyk interceptor, they had to turn to the Mandalorians. Right away you can tell by the design that it is from Mandel Motors. Just look at the similarities in the wings, and even the engine, compared to the Fang fighter and Kom'rk class. But there was a huge obstacle that the Hutts and Mandos had to get around. A little something known as the Galactic Empire. This ship was commissioned shortly after the Clone Wars came to an end, during the time of the Empire's rise. Mandalore companies, including Mandel Motors, were all prohibited from producing any military-grade ships, vehicles, or weapons. So basically everything the Mandalorians loved to produce. This wrecked the Mandalorian economy, and had productions at a dead stop until an Imperial advisor was appointed to the board of Mandel Motors. This was something the Empire did to companies all around the galaxy, even to Republic heroes like Kuat Drive Yards, the people who made the Star Destroyers that secured the Republic's victory during the Clone Wars. This advisor role was a power play to let companies know that they were essentially operating on the approval of Palpatine's agent. Ideally, this advisor would ensure that military equipment could never be sold to enemies of the Empire, but credits talk. Bribery and corruption were pervasive, and the slimy Hutts had hordes of wealth to drop into secret bank accounts. With the advisor satisfied and looking the other way, Mandel Motors was able to produce tons of military-grade ships for the Hutt cartels and the Zon Consortium. The Mandalorians were strategic in making a ship that could fit into a certain gray area. Powerful enough to attract buyers, but not so ridiculous that it could easily blow away Imperial ships across the galaxy. If it was too overpowered, it might attract Imperial higher-ups, who would use exposing the Mandalorian advisor as a way to progress their own career. Also, if you made it incredibly powerful, you would put it into a price range that would exclude many buyers. So Mandel Motors set the Scyk at a price of 55,000 credits, making it less than the cost of a TIE fighter, and nearly 1/3 the cost of the X-Wing. This is made even more impressive by the fact that it has a Class 2 hyperdrive. Not as fast as the X-Wings, but equal to many other more expensive starfighters and bombers. Produced by Mandalorians, this ship has various loadout options, making it fit the needs of diverse criminal interests. You can get 4 different loadouts, all swapped out at these 2 weapon point locations. It can be twin light laser cannons or twin ion cannons, and then a proton torpedo launcher with 4 torpedoes on board, or 1 concussion missile launcher with 6 on board. For defense, it had a light shield generator, which is more than the TIE fighter can say. The only problem is that it's considered a light interceptor, yet it's kinda slow. Usually, and almost by definition, interceptors are supposed to be faster than standard fighters, but the M3A only has a top speed of 950 km per hour, or 590 miles per hour, making it slower than the X-Wing and way slower than the TIE fighter. But it does make up for this with absurd maneuverability in the hands of the right pilot. Most who used this ship loved it, but there were some complaints about its cramped cockpit and the almost non-existent personal storage. But I must say I do like the layout of the controls. Purchase orders would often have an equal split across the different weapon loadouts, so that squadrons of criminal ships could rip apart their targets with a combination of lasers, ion blasts, torpedoes, and missiles. This method was actually used in spectacular effect against the Black Sun during the Battle of Tensari Station. Its success sparked a Mark II, where the wings are extended more, perhaps making it more aerodynamic when in atmosphere. And then Mandel Motors followed this up with the G1 M4C Dune Lizard fighter, a medium-strength fighter that was twice the price but still cheaper than the competition, and was way more powerful, something that we'll cover in more detail in another video. But sadly, all good things come to an end, and if you already hate the Rebels, here's just one more reason. Once the Rebel Alliance started to grow, and really caught the attention of the Empire, Mandel Motors felt that it was time to close shop. I imagine this means around the year 3 BBY, definitely by the year 0 BBY. And perhaps the paid-off Imperial advisor felt that if these secret ships were ever discovered, it wouldn't just be seen as corruption. Now it might be seen as funneling fighters to the rebellion, and now your corruption case just became high treason. How many of these ships still fly around the galaxy is unknown, but their reputation lives on. So that's it for the M3A Scyk Interceptor, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. This ship was first introduced in the game Star Wars Galaxy's Jump the Lightspeed back in 2004. And later it was introduced in the Star Wars X-Wing Miniatures game via the expansion Scum and Villainy. And remember that in this Legends material, they were used against the Black Sun. In the new canon, we know that Maul took over Black Sun in the Clone Wars TV show, and the Solo movie left the door open for future depictions of Maul's criminal empire. So maybe there is hope that this ship will return in canon, maybe even on the big screen.